ask you a question now. Where do you think this one's going to go? Where do you think the inflation rate in Mexico, also known by us gringos as Mexico, where do you think it's going to go? Well, the Federal Reserve, in America, the Federal Reserve targets, right around 2% in inflation. And, we're a little low these days, so we're trying to work on getting that inflation up a little bit. And I say it every time. You been to the grocery store yet, Miss Janet Yellen? Fed head? See anyone's energy bills? Anything? Nothing? How about the stuff that matters? We don't look at that. That's not how we determine inflation. You don't look at the two of the most important things? No, of course not. Because then we'd have to tell the truth. Inflation is alive and well. $28,000 car 10 years ago, now doubled. Truck, $28,000 pickup truck, now $52,000, $48,000, somewhere in that neighborhood. So inflation takes off in Mexico. And I'm thinking of the guy, what is his name? David Wilkerson, his vision from God or whatever. And, Mexico is going to default on this, maybe I think he said 100 billion, or I forgot what the number he used, and it would escalate and the euro would go down first, then it would come to America and all that stuff. Inflation in a country is not a good thing. When you have that kind of inflation, that means that people are struggling to pay for things, on top of already struggling to pay for things, which means they don't have extra money to pay for other things. And also means all this debt that they owe interest payments on as a country like we do, they have a hard time making that payment. Which brings me to say the whole thing with David Wilkerson. Before I read this article, it's from Wolf Street, by the way, Wolf Richter. Let's just see. David Wilkerson. Prophecy. I just want to reread this one every great once in a while. A 40-year-old David Wilkerson prophecy. Right in front of our eyes. What is this? Facebook thing? No. Let's go. This was given to him in April of 1973. Interesting. Why am I not finding Mexico in here? Radically new America, he says. This is something else. The America of today is radically different, and the changes have taken place with startling rapidity. Incredibly, just over 50 years since the decade of the 1960s, we have become a nation in full-blown open rebellion against God. We list a bunch of stuff. This isn't the one I wanted, though. David Wilkerson prophecy, Mexico. You can find it that way. Yes, it's on this one. Let me just search for Mexico. There it is. The Reverend David Wilkerson. It's about to happen very soon. One nation, and I'm speaking. This was from. This was not from the 70s. I think this was much more recent. But I want to say this was in the 90s. But again, that's still quite a while ago. It's about to happen very soon. One nation, and I'm speaking prophetically. If I've ever heard anything from God in my life, I heard it. Very soon, a European or North African or Eastern nation is going to default on its international loan. And when that happens, within 2 weeks, Mexico is going to default. Mexico owes $100 billion, 80% of it to American banks. And here's what's going to happen. About 2 weeks after the first country goes bankrupt, we're going to survive that because most of that money is in the first country, is owed to European banks, German, Swiss, and French banks. But a second country is going to go down, probably Argentina or Brazil, and we'll kind of live that down and say, well, maybe it's not going to hurt. But 2 weeks after the first country goes down, Mexico is going to default on $100 billion. And when the banks open the next day at 9 o'clock in the morning, $15 billion an hour will be withdrawn from our American banks. They're going to be running our banks, the Arabs. I think he meant running. Putting a run on the bank. All the Latin American countries, they're going to be running our banks, and before the day is over, the U.S. is going to have to declare a bank holiday. 6 months of horror to follow. We're going into 6 months of the worst hell America's ever seen. There's going to be chaos. Not even the National Guard's going to be able to quiet it down. We're going to have to call out the whole U.S. Army. Now, I've had visions recently where I've been in New York City and I was in Macy's in a vision and I saw people walking around stunned because they couldn't get their money out of the bank. Now, I'm going to give you a word of advice. The first country goes bankrupt. I've documented this and I've got it sealed in an envelope, and I'm going to call my friends, and I'm telling you, this is the first time I've said it in a public meeting like this, but the first country that bellies up, you go get every dime you have. Church, get your money out of the bank, because there's going to be a bank holiday and you won't be able to get a dime for 6 months. Now, of course, it's going to be restored, but the nation will never be like it is again. Here's a little bit more, but that's the main point. I remember him talking about Mexico. Whenever I see something about Mexico, that could be related to something like this potentially happening, or helping it come, it brings me back to that thought, that prophecy thing. So I just want to kind of share that again. Inflation, it says inflation spikes most since 2008 in Mexico. Bad timing. Before the elections and despite Bank of Mexico's monetary shock. Inflation is a touchy subject or topic in Mexico where wages are tight, not growing fast enough. Inflation is spiking, and consumers trying stretch even further just to keep up are not happy. Consumer prices, as measured by the National Consumer Price Index, soared 6.44% in July compared to just a year ago, according to Mexico's statistics agency, INEGI. My question is, being that it's a Mexico statistics agency, is that like what we do here? Jobless numbers were fantastic. We create a bunch of new jobs too. Everybody's employed. How come there's still 40-something million people on food stamps? Shh, don't talk about that. It was the sharpest annual inflation rate increase since December 2008, sharper than economists had forecast. It has now accelerated for the 13th month in a row, and it's very much unwanted by regular Mexicans. In case you want to see this chart, let me just pull this up for you. And this is when the old gasoline price hike happened. People were flipping out over there, and boom, instantly. Inflation, hello. The spike in inflation at the beginning of the year was to some extent due to a jump in gasoline prices brought on by deregulation of the gasoline market on January 1st. At the time, some politicians in the opposition Democratic Revolution Party called on Mexicans to stage a peaceful revolution against the price increases. It triggered a series of protests and road blockages, snarled traffic for days, but those gasoline prices did not come back down. On the contrary, kind of like we did. Remember 2008? Lindsey Williams called it in advance, by the way. $150 a barrel gas. We had people protesting. They were protesting before it was $150. And it stayed that way. It doesn't come down. Why? Because it only comes down when the club wants it to come down. That's why. Fuel prices had, which again, let me clarify, by December they were down to $40 and $50 a barrel, and Lindsay called that out while gas was $1.50 a gallon, $150 a barrel. Excuse me, nailed it. That was with the good old days when Lindsay had some great info from Ken Fromm. Fuel prices had been set by the government. Those prices were heavily subsidized. This was possible since the government owned the state oil company, Pemex, which has been embroiled in a slew of corruption scandals, and which got hit hard by the collapse in oil prices. So Mexicans experienced something peculiar. While gasoline prices in the U.S. and many other countries had plunged and remained low as a result of the oil bust, Mexicans experienced a similar plunge as a result of the oil bust, and then a sudden and powerful surge that started at the beginning of the year, even as the price of crude fell 9% over the past 7 months. Gasoline prices in Mexico surged 32%. The fuel price surge was expected to calm down by now, but it hasn't quite yet. And in July, food added to the ticket. Prices of fruits and vegetables soared 22% year over year. The whole thing was an unpleasant surprise for the government, which had been pronouncing the end of the surge in inflation prematurely each time. Presidential elections are coming up next year, and this surge in inflation is very inconvenient. Finance Minister Jose Antonio Meade, or is that Miede, when he was trying to explain the phenomenon to reporters in Mexico City, said that this time it was the fault of tomatoes. You say tomatoes, I say tomatoes. Excluding the surge in tomato prices, the inflation index would have been 30 basis points lower, he said. So around 6.1% instead of 6.4%. That would still be more than double the rate of inflation a year ago, even without those dang tomatoes. And it gets more complicated for the government. The core inflation rate, without some volatile food and energy prices, surged nearly 5% year over year. Just blaming tomatoes and gasoline doesn't quite explain the story. But as always, there's hope that this will go away and not turn into something like the inflation debacle in Argentina. Quote, in general terms, we still think that the inflation trajectory will be decreasing, he said. This has been the song and dance for a while, though. And here's more. This surge in inflation occurred despite the breathtaking recovery of the beaten down peso. The peso had fallen to a record low of 22 pesos to the dollar on January 19th, thus making imports more expensive, which would have explained part of the inflation spike early in the year. But since then, the peso has skyrocketed. It's up 22% against the dollar in 7 months. At 17.9 pesos to the dollar currently, it's back where it had been in May of 2016, and thus the peso should have disappeared as a factor in year-over-year inflation. The hope is that the surge of the peso is going to curtail inflation, Finance Minister Miede, that's what we're going with, told reporters. There being a lot of hopes involved in these days in economic policy. Again, hope. We've got hope. Hope and change, baby. Hope and change. We've got hope. You got hope. If you don't have hope, what else do you have? I'll tell you. You've got realist news barking in your ear with reality. You can smoke hopium, but realist news will come get you with the real news. There's even a bigger hope that the surge of the peso is going to last, which, given the peso's long history of just relentlessly zigzagging lower in fits and starts against the dollar, is not exactly a sure bet. To counteract these inflation pressures and to prop up the peso, the Bank of Mexico jacked up its policy rate from 3% at the end of 2016 to 7% now. A real monetary shock. The central bank will release its next interest rate decision on Thursday. It is widely expected to maintain it at 7%, which is a stunningly high rate in this world of near zero or below zero rate policies. But when inflation takes off, that's the kind of bitter medicine that's to be expected. Anyways, Wolf Richter at Wolf Street article. I will link this baby in this video. I think I got one more to do.